Take any calculator in your house. Go ahead, I'll wait. Now, try this simple calculation. 5 divided by 0. Press equals. What happened? Error? Undefined? Maybe your calculator just went blank. But here's what should terrify you about this moment. You just broke mathematics itself with the simplest operation imaginable. Every single digital device you own, from your smartphone to your laptop, contains processors that can perform billions of calculations per second. They can simulate entire universes, predict weather patterns, and guide rockets to Mars. Yet show them this one tiny symbol, 0, in the wrong place, and they surrender completely. They throw up their digital hands and say, "I cannot compute." But why? What is it about 0 that makes the most sophisticated machines humanity has ever built simply give up? The answer to this question will take us on a journey through ancient civilizations, religious controversies, and the very foundations of reality itself. Because 0 isn't just a number, it's a paradox wrapped in a mystery, hiding in plain sight on every keyboard you've ever touched. You see, when your calculator displays error, it's not malfunctioning. It's actually being honest about something mathematicians have wrestled with for over 1,000 years. Division by 0 doesn't just break calculators, it breaks our entire understanding of what numbers are supposed to do. And that breakdown reveals something extraordinary about the nature of existence itself. The detective's story begins. Step back in time with me to ancient Babylon, roughly 4,000 years ago. The air is thick with dust and the sounds of commerce. Merchants crowd the marketplace, their voices rising above the clatter of clay tablets and the scratch of reed styluses. These aren't just any merchants. They're the world's first accountants, and they're facing a problem that will haunt humanity for millennia. Imagine you're one of these Babylonian traders. You've sold all your grain for the day. Your storage bins are empty. Your shelves are bare. Now you need to record this in your accounts. How do you write down nothing? How do you represent the absence of something in a system designed to count things that exist? This wasn't just a bookkeeping headache. This was humanity's first encounter with one of the most profound philosophical questions we've ever faced. These ancient merchants needed to record emptiness, but their entire number system was built around counting presence. It's like trying to paint darkness with light or describe silence with sound. The Babylonians developed a clever workaround. They would leave gaps in their cuneiform tablets, literal empty spaces to represent empty storehouses. But gaps are problematic. Was that gap intentional, or did the scribe just skip a space? Was it a big nothing or a small nothing? You can imagine the confusion, the arguments, the mathematical chaos that ensued. What these ancient traders didn't realize is that they were grappling with a concept so revolutionary, so fundamentally challenging to human thinking, that it would take another 3,000 years before anyone figured out how to handle it properly. They were trying to capture the uncapturable, to make something out of nothing, and in doing so they began a detective story that continues to this day. The mystery deepens. Dr. Sarah Chen stands before a whiteboard at MIT, marker in hand, facing a room full of some of the brightest mathematical minds in the world. These are graduate students who can solve equations that would make your high school math teacher weep. Yet when Dr. Chen writes a simple equation on the board, 5 times 0 equals 0, something strange happens in the room. A few students shift uncomfortably. Others lean forward, sensing that something deeper is about to unfold. 0 behaves like a number, Dr. Chen begins, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of mathematical tradition. It sits comfortably on the number line between -1 and +1. It follows the rules. Add 0 to any number, and that number remains unchanged. Multiply any number by 0 and you get 0. Subtract 0 from any number, and again nothing changes. She pauses, letting this sink in. 0 looks like a number. It acts like a number in most situations, but here's the problem. 0 represents the complete absence of number. It's the mathematical equivalent of saying there's nothing here, while simultaneously being something that's very much here on this number line. One student raises her hand. But Professor Chen, if 0 means nothing, how can we use it in calculations? How can nothing plus nothing equal nothing? Dr. Chen smiles. The kind of smile teachers get when they know they're about to blow minds. Exactly. You've just stumbled onto the central paradox that has puzzled philosophers and mathematicians for over a millennium. If 0 truly represents nothing, no quantity, no amount, no presence whatsoever, then how can it participate in mathematical operations at all? She writes another equation. 0 divided by 5 equals 0. The students nod. That makes sense. Nothing divided into 5 parts is still nothing. Then she writes, 5 divided by 0 equals, and stops. The marker hovers over the board. This is where mathematics breaks down, she continues. This is where our number system, built on thousands of years of human logic, hits a wall, because if 0 is nothing, then dividing by 0 is like asking how many nothings fit into 5 somethings. It's not just impossible to answer, it's impossible to even make sense of the question. But Dr. Chen isn't finished. She turns back to face her students, and there's something almost conspiratorial in her expression. Here's what will keep you awake tonight. If 0 means nothing, if it truly represents the absence of everything, then why does it follow mathematical rules at all? Why doesn't it just disappear? Why does nothing times 5 still equal nothing instead of simply ceasing to exist? The room falls silent. These brilliant minds are confronting the same mystery that puzzled ancient Babylonian merchants, medieval European scholars, and modern computer programmers. 0 isn't behaving like nothing should behave. It's behaving like something that's pretending to be nothing. We're about to discover, Dr. Chen says, her voice barely above a whisper, that 0 isn't empty at all. It's not the absence of something, it's the presence of absence itself, and that presence is hiding something extraordinary. As Dr. Chen caps her marker and looks directly at her students and at you, she poses one final question that will echo through everything we discover next. If 0 isn't really nothing, if it's actually something disguised as nothing, then what exactly is it? And why did ancient civilizations build their entire understanding of mathematics around avoiding it completely? The answer to that question requires us to travel back even further in time, to civilizations that achieved impossible architectural feats, navigated vast oceans, and built empires that lasted centuries, all without ever grasping the concept that a child today learns before kindergarten. We're about to discover that the absence of 0 didn't just make mathematics harder for these ancient peoples, it made certain kinds of thinking completely impossible. And when 0 finally did arrive in their world, it didn't just change mathematics, it changed everything. Chapter 1. The Void That Changed Everything. There's something deeply unsettling about discovering that the greatest civilizations in human history were missing something so fundamental that a 7-year-old today possesses mathematical power they could never imagine. The Romans built aqueducts that still carry water 2,000 years later, yet they couldn't solve the equation 2 minus 3. The Greeks gave us democracy and philosophy, but they were helpless when faced with the concept of debt. What they were missing wasn't advanced technology or secret knowledge. It was a single symbol that would eventually unlock the mathematical universe itself. The world before zero. Close your eyes and try to imagine a world where the concept of nothing doesn't exist. Not just the word nothing, but the entire idea that absence could be quantified, measured, or even acknowledged mathematically. This wasn't some primitive limitation. This was the reality for civilizations that built pyramids, created democracy, and established legal systems that still influence us today. The ancient Egyptians could calculate the precise angles needed to construct monuments that have lasted millennia, but if you asked them to represent the amount of grain left in an empty storehouse, they were stuck. They had hieroglyphs for 1 bird, 2 birds, 10 birds, but no symbol for the absence of birds. Their mathematical system simply couldn't acknowledge that nothing could be something worth writing down. The Greeks took this limitation even further. They had a philosophical horror of nothingness that went beyond mathematics into the very core of their world view. Aristotle himself declared that nature abhors a vacuum. That empty space was literally impossible. To the Greek mind, if something didn't exist, it couldn't be part of reality and therefore couldn't be part of mathematics either. This wasn't ignorance. This was a carefully reasoned philosophical position that trapped them in mathematical limitations they couldn't even see. But here's what makes this truly mind-bending. The Romans, with all their engineering genius, used a number system that made basic arithmetic a nightmare. Try multiplying xi4 by 3 using Roman numerals and you'll understand why Roman accountants were among the most feared professionals in the empire. They could organize the logistics to feed entire armies across continents, but they couldn't represent the concept of owing money, because negative numbers require 0 as a reference point. These weren't mathematical failures, they were civilizations operating with what we now know was fundamentally incomplete logic. They were trying to understand the universe with one hand tied behind their backs, and they didn't even know the hand was there. The genius of ancient India. While Europe struggled with the philosophical implications of nothingness, something extraordinary was happening in 7th century India. In the scholarly halls of Ujjain, a mathematician named Brahmagupta was about to solve a problem that had stumped human civilization for thousands of years. But he wasn't trying to invent zero. He was trying to understand what happened when you had nothing. Brahmagupta's genius wasn't in creating the concept of zero, but in recognizing that nothing could follow rules. He wrote down the first mathematical laws governing zero with the same systematic precision that others used for counting sheep or measuring grain. When he declared that 0 plus 0 equals 0, he wasn't stating the obvious. He was establishing that nothingness itself was consistent, predictable, and therefore mathematical. But here's where Brahmagupta's breakthrough becomes truly revolutionary. He didn't just accept 0 as a placeholder, like the Babylonians had done centuries earlier. He treated 0 as a number with its own personality, its own behaviors, its own mathematical rights and responsibilities. 0 minus 3 gives you -3. 3 times 0 gives you 0. These weren't just accounting tricks. These were fundamental laws of reality being discovered for the first time. The psychological breakthrough here is staggering. Brahmagupta had to convince himself that nothing was something worth studying. He had to overcome the natural human tendency to dismiss absence as unimportant, and instead recognize that the absence of quantity was itself a quantity worth measuring. This wasn't just mathematical innovation. This was a complete rewiring of how humans could think about existence itself. What made this even more remarkable was that Brahmagupta wasn't working in isolation. Indian mathematics at this time was deeply connected to astronomy, philosophy and spiritual practice. The concept of void, of emptiness as a fundamental aspect of reality, was already part of Buddhist and Hindu thought. Brahmagupta was working in a culture that had already made peace with nothingness as a meaningful concept. While Europeans feared the void, Indians were learning to calculate with it. This cultural foundation allowed Indian mathematicians to make the conceptual leap that had eluded other civilizations. They recognized that mathematics wasn't just about counting things that existed, but about understanding the relationships between existence and non-existence. Zero wasn't an absence of number. It was the number that made all other numbers possible. The number that sparked fear. When zero finally reached medieval Europe through trade routes and scholarly translations, something unexpected happened. The number that had liberated mathematical thinking in India was seen as dangerous, subversive, and potentially heretical by European authorities. This wasn't superstition. This was a calculated response to what church leaders correctly identified as a threat to their entire worldview. The medieval Christian worldview was built on the concept of divine fullness. God was complete, perfect, and filled all of creation with meaning and purpose. The idea that nothingness could exist, could be measured, could be mathematically manipulated, implied that there were spaces in creation where God was not present. If zero was real, then emptiness was real, and if emptiness was real, then God's fullness was incomplete. But the fear went deeper than theology. Zero brought with it the mathematical tools for understanding debt, negative numbers, and complex calculations that threatened the existing power structures. When merchants could calculate profit and loss with precision, when scholars could solve equations that had been impossible for centuries, when the mathematical universe suddenly expanded to include concepts that had been forbidden or unknown, the established order felt genuinely threatened. The Church's response wasn't entirely irrational. They understood, perhaps better than the mathematicians themselves, that zero was more than just a number. It was a doorway to thinking about reality in fundamentally different ways. If nothing could be something, if absence could be presence, if the void could be quantified and manipulated, then the philosophical foundations of medieval society were built on mathematical sand. This is why the introduction of zero into Europe sparked not just mathematical revolution, but philosophical, theological, and eventually scientific revolution as well. Zero forced European thinkers to confront questions they had successfully avoided for centuries. What is the relationship between existence and non-existence? Can emptiness be meaningful? Is it possible that the absence of something could be more important than the presence of something else? The resistance to zero wasn't just intellectual conservatism. It was a recognition that this simple symbol carried within it the power to transform how humans understood their place in the universe. The church authorities were right to be afraid. Zero would eventually undermine not just their mathematical systems, but their entire approach to understanding reality. Modern revelation. Fast forward to today, and we've discovered something that would have terrified medieval theologians and amazed ancient mathematicians equally. The emptiness they feared and dismissed is actually the most active, creative, and fundamental aspect of physical reality. Modern physics has revealed that what we call empty space, the void, the vacuum, the nothingness between atoms, is actually seething with activity that makes a bustling marketplace look peaceful by comparison. Quantum field theory tells us that empty space is filled with virtual particles constantly popping into existence and disappearing again. These aren't hypothetical particles. They have measurable effects on the behavior of atoms and light. The Casimir effect demonstrates that two metal plates, placed close together in empty space, will be pushed together by the pressure of virtual particles. The void itself has weight, energy, and influence. This isn't just a curiosity for physicists. This is a complete vindication of the intuitive leap that ancient mathematicians made when they first decided that nothing was worth studying. They somehow sensed that emptiness wasn't empty, that zero wasn't just the absence of quantity, but the presence of infinite possibility. The vacuum of space contains quantum fields that permeate all of reality. These fields don't contain particles, they are the mathematical structures from which particles emerge. In other words, the fundamental building blocks of reality aren't things at all. They're mathematical relationships, patterns of possibility that occasionally collapse into what we experience as physical matter. The universe isn't made of stuff, it's made of structured nothingness. But here's where this becomes personally meaningful. Your thoughts, your consciousness, your ability to understand these very words depends on the precise organization of emptiness in your brain. Neurons work not just because of the electrical and chemical activity within them, but because of the carefully structured spaces between them. Your brain's power comes from its ability to organize nothingness into patterns of meaning. This revelation transforms our understanding of zero from a mathematical curiosity into a fundamental principle of existence. Zero isn't just a number we invented to make calculations easier. It's the mathematical representation of the creative potential that underlies all of reality. When Brahmagupta first wrote down the rules for calculating with zero, he wasn't just solving accounting problems, he was discovering the mathematical laws that govern the deepest structures of existence itself. Every time you use your smartphone, every time you watch a video, every time you send a message or take a photograph, you're witnessing the power of organized nothingness. Your device stores your memories, your connections, your most precious moments, using billions of zeros and ones, billions of patterns that represent the presence and absence of electrical current. But here's what will keep you awake tonight. If the presence of something requires the absence of something else to give it meaning, and if your entire digital life is built on the organized relationship between something and nothing, then what happens when nothing becomes infinite? The answer lies in a forbidden mathematical operation that reveals the hidden connection between the smallest and largest concepts the human mind can grasp. Chapter 2. When nothing becomes everything. What happens when you take one and divide it by zero? Your calculator screams error, your computer crashes, your phone shuts down. But here's what they don't want you to know. That error isn't a mistake, it's a doorway that leads to infinity itself. Every single device you own is programmed to avoid this calculation, not because it's wrong, but because it's too powerful, too dangerous, too revealing of the fundamental truth about reality that we've been hiding from ourselves for centuries. See, when you divide by zero, you don't get nothing. You get everything. Every possible number that could ever exist. And that terrifies mathematicians more than you can imagine. But before we dive into why the greatest minds in history feared this simple operation, let me show you something that will change the way you see numbers forever. Take any number, let's say 7. Now divide it by 1. You get 7. Divide it by 0.5. You get 14. Divide it by 0.1. You get 70. Notice the pattern? The smaller the number you divide by, the larger your answer becomes. Now watch what happens as we get closer and closer to zero. Divide 7 by 0.01, 700. Divide by 0.001, 7,000. The answer explodes towards infinity. It's like 0 is a black hole in mathematics, pulling everything toward endless magnitude. This isn't just abstract theory. This phenomenon powers the technology in your pocket, predicts the weather and launches rockets to Mars. Without understanding what happens when we approach 0, we'd still be living in caves. But here's where it gets mind-bending. Ancient mathematicians knew about this relationship between 0 and infinity, but they were terrified to explore it. Why? Because it revealed something disturbing about the nature of existence itself. If nothing can become everything, what does that say about the boundaries between reality and emptiness? The answer lies in a mathematical revolution that changed everything we thought we knew about motion, change, and life itself. This revolution gave us calculus, and calculus gave us the modern world. But at its heart, calculus is built on a beautiful lie, a lie about 0 that's so elegant, so useful, that we've based our entire technological civilization on it. Here's the lie. We pretend we can get infinitely close to 0 without actually reaching it. We call it a limit. We approach 0 like a ship sailing toward a horizon that never arrives. And in that eternal approach, in that dance between something and nothing, we discovered the secret of change itself. Newton understood this when he invented calculus to describe falling apples and orbiting planets. He realized that to understand motion, you need to understand the instant, the moment so brief it's almost nothing, yet in that nothing lies the key to everything that moves. Think about it. How fast is your car moving at exactly 3:15 p.m.? Not over a minute, not over a second, but at that precise instant. The answer requires dividing distance by time, but what happens when the time interval approaches 0? You get instantaneous speed, the fundamental concept that lets us navigate GPS satellites, design roller coasters, and predict where a baseball will land. Every time you use Google Maps, you're using calculus. Every time a doctor monitors your heartbeat on an EKG, they're reading the language of limits approaching 0. Every time a video game renders realistic motion, it's calculating thousands of instantaneous changes per second. The entire digital world runs on the mathematics of approaching nothingness. But here's what's truly spectacular. Your smartphone doesn't just use calculus, it's built from zeros. Billions and billions of zeros. Every photo you've ever taken, every message you've ever sent, every song you've ever downloaded, all of it exists as patterns of zeros and ones. But think about what that means. 0 represents no electrical current. 1 represents current flowing. Your entire digital life is stored as organized patterns of nothing and something. The love letter your partner sent you last week, it's a specific arrangement of nothings and somethings. The video of your child's first steps, billions of precisely ordered zeros creating meaning from emptiness, your bank account balance, numbers built from patterns of electrical nothingness and presence. This isn't just technology, it's philosophy. We've learned to give meaning to absence, to create presence from void, to build reality from organized nothingness. And it all started with that terrifying moment when ancient mathematicians first realized that dividing by 0 doesn't give you an error. It gives you a glimpse into the infinite. Now, I need to show you something that will completely reshape how you understand economics, debt, and the very concept of value itself. Before 0, ancient civilizations couldn't represent debt mathematically. They had no way to write down negative money or owing someone something. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. Imagine trying to run a business without being able to calculate profit and loss. Imagine trying to plan for the future without understanding the difference between having money and owing money. Entire empires rose and fell partly because they couldn't mathematically grasp the concept of financial nothingness. But when Islamic mathematicians brought zero to medieval Europe through trade routes, they didn't just bring a number, they brought a revolution in thinking about value itself. Suddenly, merchants could track debt, calculate interest, and plan investments. Banking became possible. Credit was born. The entire modern economy emerged from our ability to mathematically represent nothing. Your credit card exists because of zero. Your mortgage is calculated using zeros. The stock market rises and falls based on mathematical models that rely on zero as a foundation. Every economic transaction you make depends on humanity's ability to organize and manipulate nothingness. But here's the terrifying part that economists don't want you to think about too deeply. If our entire financial system is built on the mathematical manipulation of zeros, on organized patterns of nothingness, what happens when those zeros disappear? What happens when the absence that holds everything together suddenly becomes truly absent? This isn't theoretical. In 2008, when financial institutions realized that their complex mathematical models built on zeros representing debt and risk were flawed, the entire global economy collapsed. Zeros that were supposed to represent manageable nothingness suddenly revealed themselves as infinite liability. Nothing became everything, and everything became chaos. The crisis wasn't just about bad loans or greedy banks. It was about the fundamental relationship between zero and infinity playing out in real time across global markets. When financial institutions divided by zero, when they created mathematical models that approached infinite risk, the system broke down exactly like your calculator does when you try that forbidden operation. This is the power of zero that keeps mathematicians awake at night. It's not just an abstract concept. It's the hidden force that shapes reality at every level, from the quantum particles in your body to the economic forces that determine your future. But we're just getting started, because the most shocking revelation about zero isn't mathematical or economic, it's biological. The patterns of nothingness and somethingness that we've learned to manipulate in computers and markets aren't human inventions. They're the fundamental language of life itself. Your DNA is a code built from 4 chemical letters, but the meaning comes from the spaces between them, the regulatory regions that determine when genes turn on and off. Your brain processes information not just through neurons firing, but through the precise timing of when they don't fire. Consciousness itself emerges from patterns of neural activity and neural silence, from the organized interplay of something and nothing. Evolution doesn't just add complexity, it subtracts it. It removes unnecessary genes, eliminates redundant pathways, and creates efficiency through strategic nothingness. The reason you're more genetically complex than a bacteria isn't because you have more genes, it's because you have more sophisticated patterns of genetic silence. Every breath you take depends on the absence of air creating pressure differentials. Every heartbeat relies on chambers emptying and filling. Every thought you think emerges from the precise choreography of electrical activity and electrical quiet in your brain. You're not just made of something, you're made of organized nothingness. The spaces between your atoms, the gaps between your thoughts, the pauses between your heartbeats, these absences aren't empty. They're filled with potential, with information, with the very essence of what makes you alive. And this brings us to the most profound realization of all. The question isn't whether zero is something or nothing. The question is whether you can exist without it. Because as we've discovered, zero isn't the absence of everything. It's the presence of infinite possibility. But there's one more secret about zero that changes everything we thought we knew about consciousness, reality, and what it means to exist. A secret that's currently being unlocked in quantum computers and artificial intelligence labs around the world. A secret that suggests the boundary between something and nothing, between you and the universe, might not exist at all. That secret is waiting for us in the next chapter, where we'll discover that zero doesn't just represent the absence of something. It might be the creative force behind everything you see, everything you feel, and everything you think you are. Chapter 3. The Creative Destroyer. Zero has been hiding its greatest secret from you your entire life. Every breath you take, every thought you think, every star that shines in the night sky exists because of Zero's most paradoxical power. Zero doesn't just represent emptiness. Zero creates everything you see, touch, and experience. Zero is the ultimate creative force disguised as nothing at all. The moment you understand what I'm about to show you, you'll never look at emptiness the same way again. Because what we call nothing is actually the most productive, most creative, most essential force in the entire universe. And the proof is literally written in your DNA. The Big Bang's secret. 13.8 billion years ago, the universe was perfectly smooth. No galaxies, no stars, no planets, no you, just pure uniform energy spread evenly throughout space. If you could have taken a thermometer to any point in this primordial cosmos, you would have measured exactly the same temperature everywhere. Zero variation, zero difference, zero deviation from perfect uniformity. This zero should have meant the end of the story before it even began. In a perfectly uniform universe, nothing interesting can happen. No structures can form, no complexity can emerge, no life can exist. The universe should have remained a boring, featureless soup of particles forever. But here's where Zero reveals its creative genius. Those tiny quantum fluctuations, those microscopic variations that were infinitesimally close to zero, but not quite zero, became the seeds of everything. Every galaxy in the observable universe, every star system, every planet capable of supporting life, all emerged from variations so small they were practically zero. Think about this carefully. The difference between a universe with no structure and a universe teeming with complexity was variations of less than 1 part in 100,000. Variations so close to zero that ancient civilizations would have called them zero. But Zero's creative power lies precisely in these almost nothings, these near zeros that contain infinite potential. The cosmic microwave background radiation that we can still detect today shows us the fingerprints of Zero's creativity. Those slight temperature variations, those tiny deviations from perfect uniformity, are the direct descendants of the quantum fluctuations that Zero nurtured into existence. Every time you look up at the night sky, you're seeing Zero's artwork painted across the cosmos. But Zero's creativity doesn't stop with the birth of galaxies. Zero continues to shape the universe through what physicists call vacuum energy. Empty space, what we think of as pure nothingness, actually bubbles with virtual particles constantly popping in and out of existence. These particles exist for such brief moments that they're essentially zero, yet they create measurable effects on the behavior of real particles. The Casimir effect demonstrates this beautifully. When you place two metal plates extremely close together in a vacuum, the empty space between them actually pushes the plates together. Nothing is pushing on something, and that nothing exerts a real measurable force. Zero's creative power extends even to the spaces between atoms, the gaps in your body, the emptiness that fills most of what you consider solid matter. The art of nothing. Walk into any great art museum and you'll discover that the most powerful artworks use emptiness as their primary creative tool. But this isn't just an artistic technique. This is zero demonstrating its fundamental role in how human perception creates meaning from absence. Consider Michelangelo's David. The sculptor didn't add material to create this masterpiece. He removed material. He carved away the excess marble using the creative power of subtraction, the creative power of creating nothing where something used to be. Every chip of marble that fell to the floor was Michelangelo collaborating with zero to reveal the figure hidden within the stone. The most profound artistic insight is that the statue already existed within the marble block. Michelangelo's genius lay in recognizing what needed to be removed, what needed to become nothing, to allow the something to emerge. Zero guided his chisel to carve away everything that wasn't David, leaving behind only what was essential. This principle extends far beyond sculpture. In music, the pauses between notes create rhythm and meaning. The silence between sounds allows your brain to process and appreciate the melody. Without zero, without the spaces between notes, music would be indistinguishable noise. Zero creates the structure that transforms random sounds into symphonies. Japanese aesthetics have elevated this understanding to an art form. The concept of ma, which translates roughly to negative space or emptiness, is considered as important as the positive elements in any composition. In Japanese gardens, the empty spaces between rocks and plants create pathways for the eye and mind to travel. The nothing becomes as carefully designed as the something. In architecture, the spaces inside buildings are more important than the walls that contain them. A cathedral's power comes not from its stone and mortar, but from the vast emptiness it encloses. That emptiness creates the acoustic properties that allow voices to soar, the visual perspectives that direct your gaze upward, the sense of transcendence that comes from being surrounded by carefully shaped nothingness. Photography teaches us that shadow is as important as light. The areas of the photograph that contain no information, the dark spaces where details disappear into zero, create the contrast that allows the illuminated areas to have meaning. Without darkness, light becomes meaningless. Without zero, the positive values lose their significance. Even in literature, the most powerful moments often happen in what's not said. The pauses between words, the implications that hover in the empty spaces between sentences, the meanings that emerge from what the author chooses not to tell you. Zero creates the pregnant silences that allow imagination to flourish. The evolution of emptiness. Life itself is a masterpiece of creative emptiness. Your body is not a solid mass of flesh and bone. You are mostly empty space punctuated by occasional atoms, and those atoms are themselves mostly empty space punctuated by occasional subatomic particles. You are a carefully orchestrated arrangement of nothingness that has somehow learned to think about itself. But evolution discovered something even more remarkable about emptiness. The gaps, the absences, the missing pieces in biological systems are not flaws to be filled. They are features to be preserved. Evolution uses zero as its primary creative tool. Consider your brain. Neurons don't touch each other. They are separated by synaptic gaps, tiny spaces filled with nothing but chemical possibility. Your thoughts, your memories, your sense of self all emerge from the precise choreography of signals jumping across these empty spaces. Your consciousness is literally built on a foundation of gaps. If your neurons were directly connected, if there were no empty spaces between them, your brain would be unable to process information. The gaps allow for signal modulation, for complex patterns of activation and inhibition, for the subtle timing differences that create the symphony of neural activity we call thought. Zero creates the spaces where cognition can occur. Genetic evolution follows the same principle. The mutations that drive evolutionary change often involve deletions, the removal of genetic material, the creation of empty spaces in the DNA sequence where something used to be. Some of the most important evolutionary leaps in human history involved losing genetic information, not gaining it. The evolution of human language capability, for instance, involved the loss of certain regulatory genes that other primates still possess. Our ancestors didn't gain the ability to speak by adding something to their genetic code. They gained it by losing something, by creating precisely placed zeros in their DNA that allowed new patterns of neural development to emerge. Even at the cellular level, emptiness drives creativity. Apoptosis, programmed cell death, is as essential to life as cell division. During embryonic development, your fingers and toes formed not by growing new tissue, but by eliminating the tissue between them. The spaces between your digits were carved out by cells that sacrificed themselves to create functional anatomy. Your immune system relies on negative selection, a process where immune cells that would attack your own tissues are eliminated. The ability to distinguish self from non-self depends on creating gaps in the immune response, empty spaces where certain reactions are prohibited. Zero defines the boundaries that make complex life possible. Plant architecture demonstrates this principle beautifully. Leaves are not solid surfaces, but intricate networks of veins separated by empty spaces that allow gas exchange. The gaps between leaf cells enable photosynthesis, the process that converts sunlight into chemical energy and releases the oxygen you breathe. Every breath you take depends on the creative emptiness built into plant tissue. Forest ecosystems thrive because of the spaces between trees, the clearings that allow light to reach the forest floor, the gaps in the canopy that create diverse microhabitats. Biodiversity emerges not from filling every possible niche, but from maintaining empty spaces where new forms of life can experiment and evolve. The silicon soul. Your smartphone contains approximately 30 billion transistors, and every single one operates on the principle of creative emptiness. These transistors don't work by adding electrical current. They work by controlling the absence of electrical current, by creating precisely placed zeros in the flow of electrons. When you tap your phone screen, that touch is translated into patterns of presence and absence, ones and zeros, information and non-information. But here's what should astonish you. The zeros carry just as much information as the ones. In binary code, zero is not the absence of information. Zero is information about absence. Every photograph stored on your device, every song in your playlist, every message from someone you love exists as a specific pattern of zeros and ones. But the zeros in these patterns are not empty placeholders. They are active participants in meaning-making. Change a single zero to a one or a single one to a zero, and the entire file becomes corrupted, meaningless, lost. Machine learning algorithms, the artificial intelligence systems that are beginning to reshape our world, discover patterns by identifying what's missing as much as what's present. They learn to recognize faces by understanding the spaces between features, to translate languages by recognizing the gaps between concepts, to compose music by understanding the silences between notes. Neural networks, the computing systems inspired by biological brains, process information through layers of artificial neurons connected by weighted pathways. But the most crucial aspect of these networks is not the connections themselves, but the connections that don't exist, the pathways that are deliberately left empty, the spaces where information is not allowed to flow. The training process for artificial intelligence involves a technique called dropout, where random connections in the network are temporarily set to zero. This forced emptiness prevents the system from becoming too dependent on any particular pathway and encourages it to develop more robust, more creative patterns of information processing. When artificial intelligence systems generate creative content, they do so by exploring the spaces between existing patterns, by finding the empty regions in the landscape of possibility and filling them with novel combinations. The creativity emerges not from copying what exists, but from discovering what doesn't exist yet. Quantum computers, the next generation of computing technology, operate on principles that make the relationship between 0 and 1 even more mysterious. In quantum systems, information can exist in superposition, simultaneously 0 and 1 until the moment of measurement. These quantum bits, or qubits, derive their computational power from their ability to be multiple states at once, to be something and nothing simultaneously. The quantum vacuum, the closest thing to pure nothingness that physics can define, turns out to be the most informationally rich state possible. Virtual particles constantly emerge from and disappear back into this vacuum, carrying information about possible futures, possible interactions, possible realities that could exist but don't quite. 0 is not the absence of creativity. 0 is creativity's most powerful tool. From the quantum fluctuations that seeded galaxies to the synaptic gaps that enable consciousness, from the genetic deletions that drove human evolution to the binary code that stores your memories, 0 creates by removing, builds by subtracting, fills by emptying. The next time someone tells you that something came from nothing, you'll know they've got it backwards. Nothing came from something. The perfect uniformity of the early universe was broken by tiny deviations toward 0. The solid matter you think you're made of is mostly empty space punctuated by occasional particles. The thoughts you're thinking right now emerge from the carefully orchestrated gaps between your neurons. 0 is not the opposite of existence. 0 is the space where existence becomes possible. 0 is the silence between notes that makes music meaningful, the darkness between stars that makes light visible, the gaps between words that allow language to carry meaning. Every breath you take expands your lungs by creating empty space. Every step you take moves you through the nothingness between molecules. Every thought you think navigates the gaps between concepts. You are not separate from 0. You are 0's greatest masterpiece, a temporary arrangement of emptiness that has learned to contemplate its own existence. The universe began with perfect uniformity and 0 variation. 13.8 billion years later, that same creative emptiness is reading these words through your eyes, understanding these concepts through your mind, marveling at its own ingenuity through your consciousness. 0 created everything, including the capacity to understand 0 itself. That's the ultimate creative act. 0 didn't just make the universe. 0 made beings capable of discovering that 0 made the universe. The creative destroyer has revealed its greatest secret. It created creators who could appreciate the beauty of creation through destruction, the fullness of emptiness, the somethingness of nothing. And you right now are proof that 0's creativity has no limits. Chapter 4. The Ultimate Truth. Every calculation you've ever made, every equation you've solved, every mathematical truth you've accepted as fact, All of it has been building to this moment, the moment when we finally understand what zero truly is. And I'm going to tell you something that will fundamentally change how you see reality itself. You think you know what exists and what doesn't. You think you understand the difference between something and nothing. But what if I told you that the greatest minds in physics have discovered that this distinction is completely wrong? What if the very foundation of existence operates on principles so counterintuitive that they would make ancient philosophers question everything they believed about reality? The answer lies in the most advanced laboratories on Earth, where scientists are manipulating the smallest particles in the universe. And what they found there about zero will make you question everything you thought you knew about what it means to exist. The quantum revelation. Step into the most sophisticated laboratory in the world, a place where temperatures drop to just above absolute zero, where particles exist in states that defy common sense, and where the impossible becomes routine. This is where quantum computers operate, and inside these machines, something extraordinary is happening to our understanding of zero. In the classical world you live in every day, zero means nothing. It's the absence of quantity, the empty space, the void. But in the quantum realm, zero doesn't just mean nothing, it means everything at once. Let me explain this in a way that will rewire your brain. When you flip a coin, it's either heads or tails. When you turn on a light switch, it's either on or off. When you count objects, they either exist or they don't. This is the binary world of classical physics, and it's been the foundation of human logic for thousands of years. But quantum mechanics has revealed that this binary thinking is an illusion. In a quantum computer, a particle can exist in what scientists call a superposition. It can be both 0 and 1 simultaneously. Not 0 or 1, but 0 and 1 at the exact same moment. This isn't just a theoretical concept. This is happening right now in laboratories around the world, and it's being used to solve problems that would take classical computers millions of years to complete. But here's where it gets mind-bending. The moment you try to observe this particle, the moment you try to measure whether it's 0 or 1, it chooses one state. The act of observation itself forces the particle to collapse from existing in all possible states to existing in just one state. This means that 0 and 1 don't exist as fixed realities. They exist as potentials that become real only when observed. What does this tell us about zero? It tells us that zero isn't the absence of something, it's the presence of infinite potential. Every zero in every equation, every empty space in every calculation, every moment of nothingness you've ever experienced is actually pregnant with every possibility that could ever exist. Think about what this means for a moment. The zero in your bank account isn't just the absence of money. It's the potential for infinite wealth or infinite debt. The zero temperature of absolute zero isn't just the absence of heat. It's the point where quantum fluctuations become the dominant force in the universe. The 0 point of any coordinate system isn't just an arbitrary starting place. It's the reference point that gives meaning to all other positions. This revelation doesn't just change mathematics, it changes everything. If 0 represents infinite potential rather than nothing, then the entire foundation of reality operates on a principle that would have been incomprehensible to every human who lived before the quantum age. The philosopher's paradox. Throughout human history, philosophers have wrestled with the concept of nothingness, and their struggles reveal something profound about the human mind's relationship with zero. But what they discovered through pure thought, quantum physics, is now proving through experimentation. 2,500 years ago, Buddhist philosophers developed a concept called sunyata, often translated as emptiness or void. But this wasn't emptiness in the way we typically understand it. It was emptiness as the source of all existence, the pregnant void from which all things emerge. These ancient thinkers understood something that Western philosophy would take millennia to grasp, that nothingness isn't the opposite of existence, it's the foundation of existence. Western philosophy took a different path. Greek philosophers like Parmenides argued that nothing cannot exist because the very act of thinking about nothing makes it something. This created a paradox that would haunt Western thought for centuries. How can we speak about nothing without making it something? Medieval Christian philosophers faced a similar paradox. If God created everything from nothing, then nothing must have had some kind of existence before creation. But if nothing existed before God, then God created everything from something that didn't exist. This logical impossibility led to centuries of theological debate and philosophical gymnastics. Existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre took this paradox even further. They argued that consciousness itself is a kind of nothingness, a gap in being that creates the possibility of choice, freedom and meaning. According to Sartre, you are conscious precisely because you are not completely filled with being. Your consciousness is the nothing that makes you something. But here's what's fascinating. These philosophical insights, developed through pure reasoning and introspection, align perfectly with what quantum physics is revealing about the nature of reality. The Buddhist concept of sunyata, emptiness as the source of all existence, is essentially describing the quantum vacuum, the empty space that seethes with virtual particles and infinite potential energy. The Greek paradox about thinking about nothing, how can nothing be something we can think about, is resolved by quantum superposition, where nothing and something exist simultaneously until the moment of observation. The medieval Christian puzzle about creation from nothing is illuminated by quantum field theory, where particles literally pop into existence from the vacuum of space. And the existentialist insight about consciousness as a kind of nothingness finds its parallel in quantum mechanics, where consciousness plays a fundamental role in collapsing wave functions and determining reality. This convergence isn't coincidental. It suggests that the human mind, through different methods of inquiry, keeps arriving at the same fundamental truth, that zero, nothingness, emptiness and void are not the absence of reality, they are the creative source of reality. The mathematical universe. Mathematics isn't just a tool we use to describe the universe, it might actually be what the universe is made of. And if that's true, then zero isn't just a number we invented to solve problems. Zero might be the fundamental building block of existence itself. Consider this. Every physical law in the universe can be expressed as a mathematical equation. The force of gravity, the behavior of light, the structure of atoms, everything follows mathematical relationships with perfect precision. But why should this be true? Why should the universe operate according to mathematical principles at all? Some of the greatest mathematicians and physicists believe the answer is that mathematics isn't just describing reality. Mathematics is reality. The universe isn't made of matter and energy that happens to follow mathematical laws. The universe is made of mathematical relationships, and what we call matter and energy are simply the way those relationships manifest to our limited perception. If this is true, then zero occupies a unique position in the structure of existence. In mathematics, zero is the additive identity, the number that, when added to any other number, leaves that number unchanged. Zero is the reference point that gives meaning to all positive and negative numbers. Zero is the boundary between positive and negative, the balance point that defines the entire number line. But zero's role goes deeper than just organizing other numbers. Zero is the foundation of the coordinate system that describes all of space and time. Every point in the universe can be described by its distance from zero in 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal dimension. Without zero, we couldn't locate anything anywhere. Without zero, the concept of position, distance, and even existence itself becomes meaningless. Think about what this means. If the universe is mathematical, and if zero is the foundation of mathematical structure, then zero isn't just something that exists in the universe. Zero is the something that allows the universe to exist. Every star, every planet, every atom, every thought in your head right now exists because zero provides the mathematical framework that makes existence possible. This realization transforms our understanding of what it means to exist. You don't exist in space and time. You exist as a mathematical relationship to zero. Your position is defined by your distance from zero. Your motion is defined by your change in position relative to zero. Your existence is defined by your deviation from zero. And here's the most profound implication. If you are a mathematical relationship to zero, then you are not separate from zero. You are an expression of zero. You are not something that exists in addition to zero. You are something that zero becomes when it organizes itself into the pattern we call consciousness. This isn't just philosophical speculation. This is the logical conclusion of taking seriously the mathematical nature of physical reality. If mathematics is the language of the universe, then zero is the alphabet from which all words are formed. The mirror of existence, zero, functions as a mirror, but not in the way you might expect. It doesn't reflect light or images, it reflects the true nature of existence itself. And what it shows us is that everything we think we know about reality is backwards. In our everyday experience, we think of existence as the normal state and nothingness as the exception. Things exist, and occasionally they don't exist, but zero reveals that this perspective is completely inverted. Nothingness isn't the exception, it's the rule. Existence isn't the normal state, it's the extraordinary deviation from nothing. Look at it this way. In mathematics, every number is defined by its relationship to zero. Positive numbers are defined as greater than zero. Negative numbers are defined as less than zero. Zero itself is defined as the absence of quantity. But here's the key insight. Without zero, none of these other numbers would have any meaning. Zero doesn't depend on other numbers for its definition. Other numbers depend on zero for their definition. This same principle applies to physical reality. Hot is defined as greater than absolute zero. Cold is defined as closer to absolute zero. Motion is defined as change in position relative to a zero reference point. Energy is defined as deviation from a zero energy state. Mass is defined as deviation from the massless state of photons. In every case, zero isn't just one option among many. Zero is the fundamental state from which all other states are measured. Zero isn't the absence of something, it's the presence of the measuring stick that makes everything else possible. But the mirror effect goes even deeper. When you look at zero, you see yourself reflected back. Not your physical appearance, but your existential nature. You exist as a conscious being because you are not completely filled with being. You have choices because you are not completely determined. You can create because you are not completely actualized. You are free because you are not completely defined. Your consciousness is structured exactly like zero. It's the absence that makes presence possible. Your thoughts exist because of the gaps between them. Your identity exists because of what you are not. Your potential exists because of what you haven't yet become. This mirror effect reveals something profound about the relationship between consciousness and mathematics. We don't just happen to be conscious beings who discovered mathematics. We are conscious beings because we are mathematical beings. Our consciousness is structured according to the same principles that structure zero. We exist as organized patterns of presence and absence, something and nothing, being and non-being. The mirror of zero shows us that we are not separate from the mathematical structure of reality. We are expressions of that structure. We are not observers of the universe. We are the universe observing itself through the lens of zero. Full circle. We began this investigation with a simple question: is zero something or nothing? We've travelled through ancient civilizations, quantum laboratories, philosophical traditions and mathematical theories. We've seen how zero functions in computers, consciousness and cosmology. And now we're ready for the final revelation. The question, is zero something or nothing, is based on a false premise. It assumes that something and nothing are mutually exclusive categories. It assumes that existence is binary. Either things exist or they don't. But zero reveals that existence isn't binary, it's relational. Zero isn't something. Zero isn't nothing. Zero is the relationship between something and nothing. Zero is the creative tension that holds existence and non-existence in dynamic balance. Zero is the organizing principle that allows something to emerge from nothing and nothing to emerge from something. Every time you perform a calculation, you're witnessing this dynamic balance in action. When you add positive and negative numbers to get zero, you're not eliminating the numbers, you're revealing their underlying unity. When you multiply any number by zero to get zero, you're not destroying the number, you're returning it to its source. When you divide by zero and get infinity, you're not breaking mathematics. You're approaching the boundary where zero reveals its true nature as unlimited potential. This understanding transforms everything. The zeros in your digital devices aren't just the absence of electrical current, they're the creative silence that allows information to exist. The zeros in your bank account aren't just the absence of money, they're the neutral point that gives meaning to wealth and debt. The zeros in your coordinate system aren't just arbitrary reference points. They're the foundation that makes location and movement possible. But most importantly, the zeros in your existence, the gaps between your thoughts, the pauses between your breaths, the silence between your words, the space between your actions, these aren't just empty moments, they're the creative voids that allow consciousness to exist. They're the nothing that makes you something. Zero shows us that the universe isn't a collection of things that exist. The universe is a pattern of relationships between existence and non-existence, something and nothing, presence and absence. You are not a thing that exists in this universe. You are a unique expression of the relationship between something and nothing. This is why zero is so fundamental to mathematics, physics, consciousness, and existence itself. Zero isn't just a number, it's the principle that makes numbers possible. Zero isn't just a concept, it's the organizing structure that makes concepts possible. Zero isn't just nothing, it's the creative source from which everything emerges. The ancient Indian mathematicians who first treated zero as a number weren't just solving practical problems. They were discovering the fundamental structure of reality. The quantum physicists who study superposition and wave function collapse aren't just investigating subatomic particles. They're exploring the same creative principle that the ancients called zero. As we reach the end of our journey, one final truth emerges that will forever change how you see zero, how you see mathematics, and how you see yourself. Zero isn't just the foundation of mathematics. Zero is the foundation of consciousness itself. Every moment of awareness, every thought, every perception, every decision exists because consciousness is structured like zero. Your mind works because it's organized around the same principle that organizes mathematics, the creative relationship between something and nothing. When you pay attention to something, you're simultaneously not paying attention to everything else. When you choose one option, you're simultaneously not choosing all other options. When you exist as yourself, you're simultaneously not existing as anyone else. Your consciousness is defined by what it excludes as much as by what it includes. This is why mathematics feels so natural to the human mind. We're not learning an artificial system imposed on reality. We're recognizing the same organizational principles that structure our own consciousness. We're seeing ourselves reflected in the mathematical structure of the universe. And this is why zero feels so mysterious and powerful. Zero isn't just a number we think about. Zero is the structure of thinking itself. Zero isn't just a concept we understand. Zero is the pattern of understanding itself. Zero isn't just something we use. Zero is what we are. The calculator that displays error when you divide by zero isn't malfunctioning. It's encountering the boundary between the finite and the infinite, between the calculable and the incalculable, between the known and the unknowable. It's encountering the same boundary that consciousness encounters when it tries to understand its own nature. You are not separate from zero. You're not using zero. You are zero expressing itself as consciousness, as creativity, as the capacity to recognize and create patterns of meaning. You are the universe's way of understanding itself through the lens of zero. This is the ultimate truth about zero. It's not something or nothing. It's the creative principle that makes the question of existence possible in the first place. Zero is the mirror in which consciousness recognizes itself. Zero is the foundation upon which reality builds itself. Zero is the creative void from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. And you, sitting here right now processing these words, following this logic, experiencing this recognition, you are zero becoming aware of itself. You are nothing becoming something. You are everything becoming conscious of nothing. This is what zero is, the creative principle that allows the universe to exist and understand its own existence. And now you know that you are not separate from this principle. You are this principle in action, experiencing itself through the miracle of consciousness. The question is no longer whether zero is something or nothing. The question is, now that you know what zero truly is, what will you create with this infinite potential? Conclusion. The question continues. Here we are again, facing the same simple calculator, the same basic operation that started our entire journey, divide by zero. But you're not the same person who began watching this documentary. Your mind has been fundamentally altered by what you've discovered. The error message that once seemed like a simple malfunction now appears as something entirely different, a doorway to understanding the deepest mysteries of existence itself. Look at that blinking cursor on the screen. It's waiting for your input, just as it was at the beginning. But now you understand what that cursor really represents. It's not just a technological interface, it's a metaphor for consciousness itself. The active point where potential becomes actual, where the infinite possibilities of zero collapse into the specific reality of choice and decision. When you see 5, 0 =, error, you're no longer looking at a mathematical failure. You're witnessing the moment when finite calculation encounters infinite possibility. You're seeing the boundary where ordinary logic meets the extraordinary truth about reality's foundation. That error isn't telling you that mathematics is broken. It's revealing that mathematics is pointing towards something larger than itself, the transformation of understanding. Think about how your relationship with numbers has changed during this journey. Before we began, numbers were simple tools for counting, measuring, and calculating. 3 apples, $5, 10 miles per hour. Numbers were just practical instruments for navigating daily life. But now you understand that numbers are not separate from reality. They are the language in which reality speaks about itself. Every equation you encounter now carries deeper meaning. When you see 2 plus 3 equals 5, you're not just witnessing arithmetic, you're observing the fundamental process by which separate elements combine to create new wholes. When you see 10 minus 10 equals 0, you're not just watching subtraction. You're seeing the universe demonstrating how opposites can cancel out to reveal the underlying unity from which they emerged. And when you encounter 0 in any context, the 0 balance in your checking account, the 0 degrees on a thermometer, the 0 point on a graph, you now recognize that you're not looking at nothing. You're looking at the reference point that gives meaning to everything else, the creative silence that allows all other numbers to speak, the pregnant void that contains infinite potential for what could be. This transformation extends beyond mathematics into every aspect of your daily experience. The pause between your heartbeats is no longer just empty time. It's the rhythmic return to 0 that allows life to continue. The silence between words in a conversation is no longer just absence of sound. It's the creative space that allows meaning to emerge. The moment of stillness before you make any decision is no longer just hesitation. It's your consciousness returning to the 0 point of pure potential from which all choices emerge. The paradox resolved. Throughout this journey we've encountered paradox after paradox. How can nothing be something? How can absence have presence? How can emptiness be full? How can 0 equal infinity? These aren't just intellectual puzzles to be solved. They're invitations to expand your understanding beyond the limitations of either or thinking. The resolution doesn't come from choosing one side of the paradox over the other. It comes from recognizing that the paradox itself points toward a deeper truth about the nature of reality. 0 teaches us that existence is not a simple binary of something versus nothing. It's a dynamic relationship between complementary opposites that define and create each other. Consider how this applies to your own existence. You are not simply something that exists in opposition to nothing. You are a complex pattern of relationships between presence and absence, definition and openness, actuality and possibility. Your consciousness exists because you are not completely filled with predetermined content. There are gaps, spaces, zeros in your mental structure that allow for creativity, choice, and growth. Your identity is not a fixed something that remains constant through time. Your identity is more like 0, a reference point that gives meaning and continuity to the constantly changing experiences of your life. You remain you, not because you are an unchanging thing, but because you maintain a consistent relationship to the 0 point of your own consciousness. This understanding dissolves the anxiety that many people feel about emptiness, nothingness, or the void. These are not threats to your existence. They are the very foundation that makes your existence possible. Learning to be comfortable with 0, with emptiness, with not knowing, is learning to be comfortable with the creative source of your own being. The continuing question: The question, is zero something or nothing, will never be fully answered because it's not meant to be answered, it's meant to be lived. Each time you encounter this question, whether in mathematics, philosophy, science or daily life, you have an opportunity to deepen your understanding of the creative relationship between existence and non-existence. This question continues to evolve as human knowledge expands. Ancient mathematicians asked this question in the context of practical calculation and discovered positional notation. Medieval philosophers asked this question in the context of theology and discovered new ways to think about creation and existence. Modern physicists ask this question in the context of quantum mechanics and discover the participatory nature of reality. Future thinkers will ask this question in contexts we cannot yet imagine and will discover truths we cannot yet conceive. But the question also continues on a personal level for each individual who encounters it. Every time you face uncertainty in your life, you're encountering a version of this question. Every time you must choose between competing possibilities, you're working with the same creative tension between something and nothing that defines zero. Every time you experience the space between thoughts, the pause between breaths, the silence between sounds, you're having a direct experience of what zero really is. The question continues because consciousness itself is structured like zero, always returning to the reference point of pure awareness from which all specific experiences emerge. As long as you are conscious, as long as you are capable of experiencing the relationship between presence and absence, the question of zero will remain alive and relevant to your existence. The child's circle. Our final image returns us to the most fundamental expression of zero, a child drawing a circle. Watch how naturally this happens. The child doesn't think about the mathematical properties of zero, doesn't wrestle with philosophical paradoxes about existence and non-existence, doesn't worry about quantum mechanics or coordinate systems. The child simply draws a circle, and in that simple act expresses one of the most profound truths about reality. The circle has no beginning and no end. It contains infinite points along its circumference, yet its interior is defined by emptiness. It represents both completeness and openness, both boundary and boundlessness. It is simultaneously the symbol for nothing, the absence of quantity, and the symbol for everything, the shape that contains all possibilities. When you see a child drawing this circle, you're witnessing the human mind's natural recognition of the principle that underlies all existence. The child doesn't know they're creating a mathematical symbol, a philosophical concept, or a spiritual archetype. They're simply expressing their intuitive understanding of the pattern that connects all things. This is why zero feels both familiar and mysterious to us. We recognize it at a level deeper than conscious thought, because our consciousness is structured according to the same principles that zero represents. We are drawn to circles, cycles and returns to beginning, because these patterns reflect the fundamental nature of awareness itself. The child's circle reminds us that our investigation of zero is not just an intellectual exercise. It's a return to the source of our own being. Every mathematical discovery, every scientific breakthrough, every philosophical insight about zero is ultimately a recognition of something we already knew at the deepest level of our existence. The infinite beginning. As this documentary ends, your real exploration of zero begins. Now that you understand what zero truly represents, you'll find it everywhere, not as an abstract concept you learned about, but as a living reality you participate in every moment of your conscious existence. You'll notice zero in the rhythm of your breathing, the spaces between your thoughts, the pauses in your speech. You'll recognize zero in the moment of stillness before you make decisions, the empty space that allows rooms to be functional, the silence that gives meaning to music. You'll see zero in the gaps between atoms that allow matter to exist, the vacuum of space that allows light to travel, the quantum field that allows particles to emerge from nothingness. But most importantly, you'll begin to recognize yourself as an expression of zero, not as nothing, but as the creative principle that allows something to emerge from nothing, consciousness to emerge from unconsciousness, meaning to emerge from mystery. You are zero in action, zero expressing itself as the capacity for awareness, choice, and creation. This recognition will change how you approach challenges, uncertainties, and unknowns in your life. Instead of seeing these as obstacles to overcome, you'll begin to see them as expressions of zero, creative spaces pregnant with infinite possibility. Instead of fearing emptiness, confusion, or not knowing, you'll begin to recognize these states as returns to the source of all knowledge, all clarity, all fullness. The calculator still displays error when you divide by zero, but now you understand that this error is actually a portal. It's showing you the boundary between the finite and the infinite, between the calculable and the incalculable, between what can be grasped by logic and what can only be experienced by consciousness. Every time you encounter this error message, remember what you've learned. Remember that you are not separate from zero, you are zero, expressing itself as human consciousness. Remember that the question, is zero something or nothing, is not about mathematics, it's about the fundamental nature of existence itself. Remember that zero is not the absence of everything, it's the presence of infinite possibility. And remember that this moment of recognition, right now, as you process these words and feel their truth resonating in your consciousness, this moment is zero becoming aware of itself through you. This is what zero does. It creates the conditions for understanding, awareness, and recognition to emerge from the pregnant void of pure potential. The question continues, but now you're not just asking it, you're living it. You are the question that zero asks about itself, and you are the answer that emerges from the asking. This is the ultimate truth about zero, about consciousness, and about you. The question and the answer are one, the seeker and the sought are one, the zero and the one are one. Welcome to the infinite beginning of your relationship with zero. The journey has just begun.